I want to thank you all for being here at this forum. This is not an official hearing. Democrats asked for an official hearing in which you could be invited to speak to all of the Senate and, in fact, to speak to all of the country. The Republicans refused to do that, and so we are holding this forum so that there will at least be a chance for your voices to be heard on the Mnuchin nomination. You will give us a firsthand account of what happened to you from a bank that was under his leadership. So I appreciate your being here today. I appreciate my colleagues who are helping with this. You know, you've come from across the country to be able to tell your stories. And we are here because President-elect Trump has named Steve Mnuchin to be his Secretary of Treasury. The Treasury Secretary is the single most important economic official in the country. And if he is approved by the United States Senate, then Mr. Mnuchin will make decisions that will touch the lives of every single American. He will advise the president on the economy. He will oversee the IRS. He will manage the nation's finances. And he will lead the council that is responsible for reining in Wall Street to prevent the next financial crisis. Senators voting on this nomination must decide what kind of a Treasury Secretary that Mr. Mnuchin would be. Will this economy create jobs and grow wages for all Americans, or will it simply work for those at the top? Unfortunately, judging by Mr. Mnuchin's tenure as head of OneWest Bank, there is significant evidence that he has no interest in working for the benefit of all Americans. In late 2008, as the financial crisis was sweeping across this country, Mr. Mnuchin led a team of investors to purchase IndyMac Bank out of the federal receivership. Now, he rebranded the bank as One Bank and put himself in charge as CEO. And then Mr. Mnuchin and OneWest did something quite extraordinary. They acted decisively to boot tens of thousands of families out of their homes all across this country. Foreclosures happen in an economic crisis, but OneWest was different. It quickly gained a reputation as a foreclosure machine, even when compared to the other financial institutions that aggressively and illegally tossed families out of their houses after the financial crisis. OneWest was notorious for its belligerence and for its cruelty. And 8 years after the crash, they're still doing it. The stories you'll hear today will break your heart. A 90-year-old woman in Florida who was foreclosed on because of a 27-cent shortfall on her account. A woman in Minnesota who was foreclosed on and locked out of her home by the bank in the middle of a blizzard. A 99-year-old man in California who lost his home of over 40 years after he was sold a teaser rate mortgage at the age of 95. Countless homeowners with the misfortune of ending up with a OneWest mortgage have had their lives turned upside down. Some have ended up homeless. OneWest paid millions of dollars for engaging in predatory foreclosure practices, including nearly $3 million for violating the rights of active duty service members. OneWest's model was terrible for homeowners, but it was great for Mr. Mnuchin. 6 years after buying the bank, he sold it and reportedly may have pocketed more than $200 million in personal profits. Mr. Mnuchin's confirmation hearing will take place tomorrow. At that hearing, he will have the opportunity to explain why his years of grinding families into the dirt at OneWest Bank does not disqualify him from becoming the nation's top economic official. But we believe that senators should also hear from some of the many thousands of families who had direct experience with his bank. And that is why 25 Democratic senators wrote a letter last week asking the Republican chairman of the Senate Finance Committee to include some people as witnesses at Mr. Mnuchin's hearing. Now, the chairman refused, so we invited them to come to the Senate anyway, and we have invited every single senator, Democratic or Republican, to attend this forum. I should note that we also invited Mr. Mnuchin to come here today to answer questions and to hear from these people directly. He declined. So today we have 4 people with us who were foreclosed on or threatened with foreclosure by OneWest. Colleen Eisenhodra from Minneapolis, Minnesota, is 84 years old. I hope you don't mind my saying that. Good. When her husband got a reverse mortgage on their fully paid-off home from Financial Freedom, which is a OneWest subsidiary, the broker assured the couple that Colleen could keep living there even if her husband passed away. That was a lie. Just days after the funeral for her husband of 55 years, the bank told her she needed to pay off her entire loan immediately or face foreclosure. She's been fighting them off ever since, but the threat continues to hang over her head and the heads of those in her family. Heather McGreary from Sparks, Nevada, and her husband did everything they were told. They did it multiple times to try to get a loan modification from OneWest. It didn't matter. OneWest strung them along for years, but foreclosed anyway, so abruptly that it literally put Heather, her husband, and her twin boys out on the street. Sylvia Oliver from Scotch Plains, New Jersey. Would you like to introduce Ms. Oliver?
I will in a minute.
Okay, good. I'll just go through this. Has been trying for years to get a loan modification from OneWest. And for years, the bank has refused to work with her in good faith. She was just about to lose her battle. Her foreclosure date was literally today, but she just got a 30-day reprieve, thanks in part to the efforts of Senator Menendez's office, and I know he'll have more to say about that later. And Christina Clifford from Carlsbad, California. A self-employed small business owner, she continually followed OneWest's instructions for obtaining a loan modification, and OneWest kept cashing her checks, but making up excuses about her paperwork. Christina was foreclosed on just days after a OneWest employee personally assured her that she could still work out a modification to keep her home. We are also very lucky today to have the chance to hear from Paulina Gonzalez, the executive director of the California Reinvestment Coalition. She and her organization have been tracking OneWest's predatory foreclosure practices for years and working with families, trying to help them stay in their homes. So again, I want to thank you all for being here today. I know how difficult it is to talk about what you have gone through, but you are doing a great service to the Senate and to the country by being here. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say today. Thank you so much. Thank you. Senator Stabenow, would you like to make some remarks?
Senator Warren, I just want to, first of all, thank you for your leadership and pulling us together, and thank all of you for being here. Your voices are very important, and because they were not available to the senators in terms of the official confirmation process, we believe it's our responsibility to give you a forum, to learn from you, and to understand what happened, and so welcome.
Senator Menendez, would you like to make an opening remark?
Yes, thank you, Senator Warren, for hosting this and bringing us together. And as the author of the letter that you referred to, as a member of the Senate Finance Committee and the Senate Banking Committee that we sent to Chairman Hatch, to have a panel of witnesses that could speak to their experiences as it relates to Mr. Mnuchin's actions, which unfortunately is not being honored. I really appreciate all of you coming from across the country to share your personal stories, because one way or the other, it's going to be part of the record. One of the things I get to do is ask unanimous consent to include statements in the record, and I'm going to take all of your statements and ask for them to be included in the record tomorrow. So that should be part of the record before us. I have the particular pleasure to welcome one of my constituents, Ms. Sylvia Oliver from Scotch Plains, New Jersey, and her sister, Sheila Oliver, Assemblywoman Sheila Oliver, who is the former Speaker of the New Jersey Assembly, so they messed with the wrong family here.
Go get them.
She has been fighting, Ms. Oliver has been fighting to save her home from foreclosure for more than 7 years. Like so many other Americans, when the economy took a turn for the worse, Ms. Oliver's hours were cut, and she struggled to pay her mortgage, even as she was trying to be a responsible borrower. And as you'll hear from her, she tried time after time to get a loan modification, each of the 8 times getting the runaround from Mr. Mnuchin's bank. In fact, up until yesterday afternoon, she was facing the reality of a foreclosure sale that was scheduled for today, and despite all of that, she insisted on being here to tell her story. Because of her perseverance, that foreclosure has been delayed for 30 days, but delay is not enough. We need a modification here. As you'll hear from her, OneWest's refusal to work with Sylvia, in my view, is also a refusal of thousands of others, is a clear example of putting profits over people, a philosophy that has no place at the Treasury Department. We need a Treasury Secretary who will fight for Americans, not one who has made a fortune fighting against them. When you privatize profits but socialize the costs and the risks, that simply is not a policy that works for our people in our country. So I appreciate very much all of you, but Ms. Oliver, for coming. I have a meeting with the designee for the Secretary of Transportation. It's very important to us in New Jersey with one of the largest transportations, so I'm going to have to walk away for a little bit, but I hope to come back. And with that, I think I'm going to turn to my new colleague, a member of the Banking Committee, Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Senator Warren, thank you also for bringing us together today. And let me just say thank you to all of you. You've come a long way, and it is not an easy thing to tell your story to a room full of people, cameras everywhere, but I want you to know that your stories are important, and they are what we should be hearing and what my colleagues should be hearing. It's real life, what happens to you. And what we do here in Washington has an impact on your lives. I know, as the former Attorney General of Nevada and now the U.S. Senator from Nevada, I get the honor of introducing Heather. And thank you for being here. Nevada, and I don't have to tell Heather this, but Nevada was ground zero for this foreclosure crisis. Too many families lost their homes. And it was because of the practices that we are here to talk about, like banks like OneWest, or just unbelievable in not working with homeowners, their foreclosure practices, the dual track that they would have at times to say they were going to help families and at the same time still putting them on the path to foreclosure was egregious. And it was a practice that I saw in Nevada and continued to fight against the big banks and anybody who supported them. And for me, to learn more about Mr. Mnuchin's qualifications and experience and whether he's the right choice to be Secretary of Treasury is an important part of the process that's playing out right now. And your stories, your examples are going to be instrumental in helping us make those decisions. I want to thank Heather for being here. She's from Sparks, Nevada. If people don't know, it's the northern part of the state. It's a beautiful country. She's going to share her story with her family. I won't go into a lot of it because she will say what happened to her, but please know her story where they lost their jobs because of the financial crisis. They lost their homes. Their struggle was to make sure they had food on the table for their kids, that they could pay those bills, have a home that their kids could go to, that they would feel comfortable for their future, was taken out from underneath them. And I don't know about all of you in the room today, but when you make that investment in your home, that's a long-term investment. And that is something that you should be able to count on for the protection of you and your family. And when a bank or somebody comes along that wants to take it away from you because they're playing politics or Wall Street's coming in and betting on whether or not you're going to be able to pay those bills, that's not the message we should be sending. And that's the fight we have right now. So, Heather, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank all of you. I look forward to hearing your stories, and they will be instrumental in helping us as we make a decision on the next Secretary of the Treasury. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Durbin, would you like to offer a word of welcome?
I certainly would. Thank you for this gathering and certainly for the witnesses that have come forward here. It is important to put a face on the foreclosure crisis, and it's important to be honest about those who profited from it and those who paid a heavy price. For many families who've been through this foreclosure, their life will never be the same. They've seen things happen to them which are not only heartbreaking but devastating from a financial viewpoint. And for many of the communities and neighborhoods they lived in, they may never recover. What happens after a home is foreclosed, then boarded up, then vandalized, then set fire, then torn down? If you want to know, come to my hometown of East St. Louis, Illinois. It'll show you 50 years later what it looks like. It looks like Dresden after World War II, vacant lot after vacant lot. Somewhere along the line, our system, our financing system for homes failed, and as a consequence, this poor city just sits there as a bare reminder of what it might have been many years ago. So I thank all of you for coming. And I thank you for reminding us what families endured during this and what the bankers' decisions meant to the lives of you and many people like you. For many of them, it was just a calculated business decision. For you, it was a decision which was a life-changing one. This gentleman, who aspires to be our Secretary of the Treasury, needs to show not only competence on banking issues, but an understanding of banking customers across America, and certainly an understanding of what this nation and its families need. If there was any message from this last presidential campaign, it was that we were going to start caring about working families across America. Appointing someone to this position who had a hand in the devastating decisions that hurt so many working families is impossible to explain. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Merkley, would you like to say a brief word?
Very briefly, because we want to get to hearing your stories. I live in a blue-collar community. I saw home after home empty as a result of foreclosures. I witnessed an enormous number of tactics from teaser rate loans on the front end to dual tracking under the HAMP program, to efforts to find technical reasons to foreclose on somebody and using robo-signing and other illegal practices to do so. It is an assault on a foundation of success for a family, that is ownership of a home. It gives you a stake in a community. It gives you stability for your children. We should be doing everything possible to make sure that these types of predatory practices never happen. And the concept that we are entertaining a nomination of an individual who specialized in making a huge amount of money by implementing these types of practices is something I'm profoundly disturbed by. Thank you.
Senator Hirono, would you like to say a brief word?
Just very briefly, I read the materials on this nominee, and it really made me shudder, because I served in the United States House of Representatives when we had the horrible 2008 crash and all the millions of families who were impacted, including some in Hawaii who came to my office for help with trying to renegotiate their mortgages. And it was with the company that this nominee was at the head of. And so we also heard firsthand from people in Hawaii who encountered the kind of unsupportive position, and I would say in cases illegal, predatory practices. So I thank you all for being here to be the voice for millions of people who were impacted by what happened.
Thank you. And Senator Blumenthal, just briefly.
I want to, first of all, thank Senator Warren for bringing us together, and thank you for being here. Before I came to the United States Senate, I was the Attorney General for the state of Connecticut, and I served during the period when many of these foreclosure abuses and the practices that led to foreclosure came to light. In fact, my state of Connecticut has led the effort against some of the rating agencies that put their imprimatur on the mortgages and other financial instruments that
incorporated the mortgages when they were packaged and sold. And when I brought actions against the banks and against the rating agencies, everybody said, you'll never win. But those abuses were so egregious that in fact we won. And unfortunately, the ones who really lost were the people put those people on their back, knock them down, and put our economy on its back as well. So this kind of story needs to be told before we even consider a nominee whose financial disclosures have not been submitted, whose background check remains absent, who has a lot of explaining to do, and you're going to give us the material and the facts and perspectives and insights we need to be effective. So thank you for being here today. It makes an enormous difference.
So good. Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. I appreciate it. You're going to notice people getting up and leaving. There are other hearings going on, but as many people as possible want to come in to be able to hear these stories firsthand, and we'll make the record available to everyone. So, Ms. Eisenhodroff, could we start with you, please? And would you make sure to turn your microphone on?
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
There
Good.
we go.
And move it close.
Okay.
There you go.
Should I read off what I have here?
Whatever you'd like to do, if you
Just,
take
yeah.
maybe no more than 5 minutes, just to be able to
Okay,
get
it's
us.
not
We'll
very
have plenty
long.
of questions.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Colleen Eisenhodroff. I am 84 years old. I am a resident of Minneapolis, Minnesota. My husband Monroe and I purchased our home located at 2753 Ewing Avenue in 1963 as home for our family of 6 children. They called us the Brady Bunch of Ewing Avenue. Our house was the heart and soul of our family. Monroe and I were married for 56 years, and we successfully ran 4 small grocery stores. And we've lived in the house for 54 years. I would like to thank all of you very much for allowing me to share my story. I am here today because Financial Freedom, my reverse mortgage server, is trying to foreclose on my home. This is despite the fact that when my husband Monroe and I took out this loan, they told us that I could remain in the home if Monroe should die before me, which he did September 12, 2014. In July 2006, my husband and I decided to take out a reverse mortgage loan with Financial Freedom. It was a very complicated process. Someone came to our house and I was asked to sign a number of papers. Usually, Monroe handled the financial matters of our household. We were told that I could live in the house if Monroe passed away. It was never Monroe's or my intention that the survivor of the 2 of us would have to sell the house or leave if one of us died. We would not have signed for the loan if we thought that was the case. My husband Monroe passed on September 12, 2014. A mere 10 days later, despite what we had been told, Financial Freedom contacted me and told me that I needed to pay off the loan immediately. This was news to me. I was in no financial position to do so. Since then, Financial Freedom has been trying to foreclose on me. I think this is an injustice in that an elderly woman was deceived, and now Financial Freedom is trying to take my home. Why would Financial Freedom do this to me? I relied on what I was told, and now they are trying to kick me out of our family home. How was I supposed to know if what I was told wasn't true? What am I supposed to do now? My understanding is that in such circumstances, financial freedom blames HUD for kicking out non-borrowing spouses. Experts who have reviewed my paperwork have told me that this isn't even a HUD-backed loan. So financial freedom has no one to blame but themselves. It seems financial freedom should be working to keep people like me in their homes, not fighting to kick us out. Just a little bit more. I hear that Steve Mnuchin was a leader of the bank that is doing this to me and other seniors. I do not think a man like that should be the Treasury Secretary and in charge of our economy. We can't let that happen. Thank you again for allowing me to tell my story on behalf of those who have had bad dealings with financial freedom on OneWest.
Thank you so much, Ms. Eisenhodroff. We really appreciate your coming here, bless you, to tell your story.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bless you.
Goodness.
Are you allergic to
I
these?
don't know.
Yeah,
I think I may be. There's something going on.
for good reason.
Yes.
Ms. McCreary.
Hi there, thank you for having us. Her situation, you have to be aware, is current. She's still going through this process.
Yep.
I just learned this yesterday. She's 84 years old. She doesn't know if her house is going to be available to her when she comes home. She's in limbo, completely in limbo. It devastates me. Our story is, bringing all this up has definitely rehashed the past, so to say, and it's very emotional to me, especially hearing these other people. It's just incredible that this was allowed to go on. I was unaware of it completely until recently. But anyway, so my name's Heather, and I'm here from Sparks, Nevada. Thank you for being here. I'm representing my husband, Jack, my kids, Jaden and Clara. This is my story about how my family's American dream turned into a nightmare. I'm sharing this story with the hope of explaining why we cannot let Steve Mnuchin become Secretary of the Treasury. Putting Steve Mnuchin in charge of the Treasury Department would mean that a man who profited off the struggles of families like mine would be one of the most powerful people in the U.S. economy. For a while, it looked like our shot at the American dream was going pretty well. In 2006, Jack and I bought our dream home in Sparks, just a mile away from my parents, a short walk to Jane and Clara's schools and the parks so the kids could play. I was working as a home health care worker, and Jack was working in construction. Together, we were managing really great. We were living the American dream. Then 2008, when the economy crashed, I was laid off first, and then Jack was laid off the following year. Jack found a job pretty fast. He went from making $25 an hour to $8.50. He took a job that he could get. There was no jobs available at all. And he's a man that can't sit around the house, so he found a job. Between the cut in Jack's pay and the loss of income I experienced, I went on unemployment and was able to receive that. Thank you for that. And all of you that were involved in that back then, it was what held us above water for sure. However, we were determined to keep our dream home. So Jack and I we did everything. We marked, crossed all our T's, dotted all our I's, whatever we could do on a modification. We sought help from the Hope Now Alliance. That was in the beginning of 2009. With them, we were working with a HUD counselor. That was another program that was set up, and eventually the HAMP, H-A-M-P program was set up. We followed all that. We worked through our counselor through the Washoe County Senior Law Project. So everything, all the paperwork, everything was exactly the way it was. It wasn't just like me sending it down to the FedEx office and sending the fax. It was processed through the law center. We worked side by side with both organizations to do what was required by our mortgage server, IndyMac/OneWest, that later became OneWest. When we asked for help, OneWest gave us a short forbearance that allowed us to make smaller payments for 6 months. After making those payments, we applied for a loan modification. By applying for the HAMP program, we thought we were back on the road to keeping our house. We complied 100% with OneWest requirements for HAMP, and we're nervous about being able to keep our house, so we were extremely careful that we did everything right to keep the process forward. Our application for HAMP was processed, and we were approved for modification. I sent the signed paperwork and first payment under the modification payment amount. But then the process started to fall apart. After 30 days, OneWest returned our personal check and told us that only certified checks were accepted. And so now they voided the modification offer. We had followed the instructions on the letter on OneWest paperwork, crossing our Ts and dotting our Is, but in the end, it didn't matter. OneWest rejected our HAMP application and modification and put us on the road to foreclosure. OneWest told us to reapply, send in the same paperwork over and over. We did this 2 times. I have a stack of paperwork that, I kept everything, which I thought I had buried or gotten in the trash until this came up last week and found it. 2 times we reapplied for that, and it was, you'd apply and they'd stop you. You don't have what you just put in, so you have to resubmit. So it was just like this vicious back and forth and back and forth. We never progressed at all. As far as I can tell, OneWest never attempted to process the loan modifications, the second or third. The foreclosure went through, and we lost our home September 10, 2010. The foreclosure left us without a home. Finding a house after that was extremely difficult because our credit. Finding a rental in that economic time was terrible. My husband works for the Humane Society. We have dogs and cats and turtles, and it was a nightmare to find a place. We ended up going through Craigslist and paying 3 times the amount of what we should have been paying for a terrible house, but it was in our school districts, and that was what was so important. And in that process, up until we've been in the same house now for 3 years, but we went through 3 different rentals in that time. So on top of being homeless, my kids were just shuffled round and round. We had, it was a terrible thing. And when we foreclosed, it was pretty traumatic on us. Our kids, we kind of kept things away from them, but they lost school, didn't know where they were going to live. It was truly homeless, and we shouldn't have been homeless people. We were living like homeless people. It's hard to explain the shame, the embarrassment, and the grief that we felt. I've cried a river of tears over this. I really don't think we were asking too much. We wanted to hang on to our home for the sake of our kids. We did everything we could to stay in our home. And while I probably never know exactly what OneWest did, the outcome of my story proves that Steve Mnuchin's company had no interest at all in helping us. They wanted to foreclose because they are focused on their profits. Putting Steve Mnuchin in charge of the country's financial system is an insult to families like mine. Families who work hard and did everything they could to get by after the economy collapsed. Take it from my experience, I know he will not be looking out for working people. Instead, he will use his position to make the economy work better for people like himself. On behalf of my family and others like it, I ask you to please reject Stephen Mnuchin as Treasurer Secretary.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McCreary. Appreciate your being here. Ms. Oliver.
Good afternoon, Senator Warren and other senators. My name is Sylvia, thank you. My name is Sylvia Oliver. I am a homeowner from Scotch Plains, New Jersey. I got my mortgage from IndyMac in May 2008, and about a month later, IndyMac failed. I want to share my story because it is more than a house. It is a home for me, my husband, my 3 children, and my grandchildren. In early 2009, my husband and I were facing financial difficulties. Because of the economy being in bad shape, my husband was between jobs. We reached out to OneWest to request a modification. We were told that we had to make 3 payments in order to move forward on a permanent modification, and so we made those payments. After making those payments, I reached back out to OneWest to find out what the next steps were, but I couldn't get a straight answer from them, so we continued to making partial payments, even though it was a challenge for us financially. In February 2010, I submitted a modification application to OneWest Bank. About 6 weeks later, I received a notice of intent to foreclose. However, the person I had been talking to at OneWest, a man named Albert, told me not to worry and encouraged me to continue submitting updated documents to the bank. So for the next year, I would submit new documents to the bank by way of FedEx or through faxes. And every week I would call Albert and ask if he had an update on my situation. And every week I was told there was no answer and to call back the next week. After a year of my weekly phone calls, I finally received a denial letter from OneWest in February 2011. When they said they couldn't modify my loan, Albert at OneWest told me I could reapply for a modification, which I did, because I really wanted to keep our home. For the next several months, the cycle would repeat, with the bank telling me to reapply for modification and me believing that they were sincere, and then a few months later being told we had been declined again. This was surprising because during this time, we were back on our feet and our incomes were both increasing, which meant we were in a better position to pay our mortgage. At the end of 2015, I received another notice of foreclosure from the bank. At this point, it became clear to me that OneWest never had any intention of modifying the loan in such a way that they would still get paid back and we were able to keep our home. In March of 2016, I hired a lawyer because I thought they might have more success working with the bank than I did. At my attorney's advice, I filed a Chapter 13 bankruptcy as part of another modification application. That process went on for about 5 or 6 months, with the same cycle of me sending paperwork over and over again to the bank, and the same answer again. Last year, I was facing foreclosure 3 weeks before Christmas. However, that was then postponed until this month. In fact, I was supposed to be foreclosed on by OneWest today. However, Senator Menendez's office called OneWest. I learned that my sale had been postponed until next month. Early this month, I sought help from a HUD-approved housing counselor. She worked with me and my husband to document our income and to submit a modification application. After analyzing our situation, she was surprised to hear that we had not qualified for a modification earlier, especially since my husband and I both have good incomes. As of right now, I am still facing foreclosure next month, and I know in my heart this is because OneWest's only intent was to foreclose on my home. This bank has had ample opportunities to modify my loan. In fact, they told me that they owned the loan, so I know they can't blame the situation on the investor not allowing them to modify my loan. Nobody should have to go through the experience that I've gone through, as well as others, during the past several years with OneWest Bank. It's been very painful and stressful not knowing if my kids and my family are going to have a home to live in, or if it's going to be foreclosed on. I would ask you to remember my experience when you consider whether Mr. Mnuchin is qualified to lead the Department of Treasury. As the CEO and chair of OneWest Bank, Mr. Mnuchin had the opportunity to help families like mine with responsible loan modifications, and he didn't. I don't think this is a track record that anybody should be proud of.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oliver. Appreciate it. Appreciate your being here today. Ms. Clifford.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. My name is Christina Clifford, and I'm hoping that by sharing my story with you, I can explain why I believe nominating Steve Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary would be a serious mistake for our country. I experienced firsthand what it was like to be subject to OneWest's greed, and I can tell you that the person who ran OneWest Bank should not be the person responsible for oversight of the U.S. economy. In 2001, when I was 20 years old, I bought my first home. I was going to school full-time and I was working full-time. I found a great condo in Whittier, California, just outside Los Angeles. I was young, but I've always been a motivated self-starter. I'm also self-employed, a small business owner, acupuncturist, which is my primary source of income. Things were going fine, and I was never, ever late on my mortgage payments. However, that changed in 2008, like it did for so many of us, when the economy took a turn for the worse. My business struggled, and I started relying on credit cards to stay afloat. In March of 2009, I was unable to make my entire mortgage payment for the first time in 8 years as a homeowner. I called OneWest directly to see what options I would have for keeping my home. They told me flat out that because I had never been delinquent and had perfect payment history, they had no way of helping me. In order to get help, they said I would have to fall behind on my payments. Of course, this was misleading, and I've seemed to found out this seems to be a common tactic that they use to push people into default. From there, I began the long process of a loan modification through the Home Affordable Mortgage Program, or HAMP. I sent in numerous documents to OneWest, and in May, I was offered my first loan modification. I was thrilled. The new payments would fit perfectly in my budget, so I signed the loan modification papers and sent them via FedEx along with a check, cashier's check, for the first payment under the new modified payment amount. In July, I expected OneWest to send me a statement with the new lower payment amount. Instead, I received a letter stating that they had not received my loan modification paperwork, so the modification terms were no longer valid. I called them, and OneWest confirmed that they had not received any of my returned loan modification agreement. I knew right away this wasn't right because they had cashed the check for the first modified payment in the same FedEx envelope. That they managed to cash the check but completely neglect the loan modification agreement, again, the same envelope, is absolutely outrageous. I had no choice but to apply again, this time submitting even more documents. I was told to submit and resubmit many duplicative documents in many different formats. Despite how difficult OneWest made the process, I did everything they asked because I was determined to keep my home. On August 3rd, 2009, I received a notice of default from OneWest, but proceeded with my second attempt at modifying my loan. I received the second loan modification offer later that month. The terms were almost identical to the offer made to me in May. So I quickly signed the offer, mailed it in with another check. In October, I got a letter exactly like the one earlier saying they had not received the loan modification paperwork and that the modification was no longer valid. Yet as they did the first time, they cashed the cashier's check that I sent in. At this point, I felt I had no choice but to get an attorney who worked to get my foreclosure postponed while the loan modification process played out. She spoke with the people at OneWest who told her that they would postpone the sale of my condo until the loan modification process was completed. This simply was not true. On the evening of December 3rd, 2009, I received a knock on my door from a man that introduced himself, apologize, as a new owner of my property. And in March of 2010, I received a final notice telling me that I had 5 days to leave my condo, pack up 10 years of my life, and be out. I do apologize. The reason I'm sharing my story is because there are so many other people out there, like me, who got left in the dust. Steve Mnuchin profited from people like me, even when we did everything we could to keep our homes. You might say that he did not personally authorize OneWest or IndyMac to cheat me out of my home, but his fortune rose as a direct result of managing a company that routinely engaged in irresponsible behavior. For someone who will be tasked with making sure that the economy is doing all it can for people like me, people are trying to get ahead even when it seems like the system is rigged against them. Steve Mnuchin is not that person. He is just the opposite. Please make a statement for people like me, my colleagues, and oppose his confirmation for Treasury Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clifford. Thank you very much for coming here and telling your story. Ms. Gonzalez.
Good afternoon. My name is Paulina Gonzalez. I am the Executive Director of the California Reinvestment Coalition. I want to begin first by thanking Senator Warren for convening this forum and the assembled senators here today. It is critically important that we hear directly from the people who have lost their homes due to the egregious practices and abuses by OneWest Bank under Mr. Mnuchin's leadership before deciding on his nomination to the high and important office of Treasury Secretary. I also want to thank the courageous women who have traveled from afar to testify here today. Thank you so much. I know it's not easy. Over the years, we've heard similar stories that are all too familiar. Despite making every attempt to do the right thing, these working families lost their homes due to aggressive and malicious foreclosure practices at the hands of Mr. Mnuchin and his bank. Unfortunately, the people here today represent only a tiny fraction of the over 60,000 families impacted by OneWest's foreclosure practices across the country. CRC and Urban Strategies Council analyzed data showing that OneWest foreclosed on over 36,000 families in California and 24,000 families nationally. All of these foreclosures occurred after Mr. Mnuchin purchased IndyMac Bank. In addition, we suspect that OneWest's reverse mortgage subsidiary, Financial Freedom, has foreclosed on more seniors, widows, widowers, and heirs than any other company participating in the federal home equity conversion mortgage program known as HECM. A Freedom of Information Act request that we filed with HUD revealed 16,000 foreclosures on seniors, widows, widowers, and their family, or 39% of all HECM foreclosures, roughly twice the rate one would expect given the bank's market share. Mr. Mnuchin may defend his record by saying that he inherited all these bad loans, that the foreclosures were inevitable, and that his bank followed the law in dealing with his customers. We strongly disagree, and it appears that we are not alone. In a CNN story that aired on January 3rd about Mr. Mnuchin and Financial Freedom, a HUD spokesperson was quoted as saying, "While HUD doesn't dispute that it has strict rules for government-backed reversed mortgages, OneWest had the ability to give survivors more time, but chose not to." Mr. Mnuchin's spokespeople have also praised his modification record, but we are not sure there is much to praise. The most recent data from the Treasury Department shows that OneWest had among the highest denial rates for the Home Affordable Modification Program, HAMP, that we've heard about today. The federal, and under Mr. Mnuchin, OneWest denied 3/4 of the thousands of loan modification requests that came in from families trying to save their homes. OneWest was much more likely to deny loan modifications under this program than Bank of America or Wells Fargo. A January 2013 memo from the California Attorney General's office revealed a staff investigation finding of widespread misconduct at the bank, including backdating thousands of foreclosure documents, improper foreclosure auction credit bidding, which meant the bank could claim tax exemptions it wasn't entitled to, proceeding with foreclosures without the proper authority to do so, and speeding up foreclosure timelines. All of these practices deprived working families in California a fair chance to stay in their homes. Some may note that other banks have had more foreclosures in California and nationally, and this makes sense given that IndyMac was not the largest national lender. But we have labeled OneWest a foreclosure machine, not only because it foreclosed on more than 60,000 American families, but because OneWest pushed through 9 times as many foreclosures as home purchases and refinance loans in neighborhoods of color in California. The Treasury Secretary leads our economy. The Secretary helps oversee our banking system and will have much to say about important policies relating to banking, housing, and economic development that will impact all Americans. The country needs a Treasury Secretary who will consider the needs of all Americans, including working-class Americans. Mr. Mnuchin's tenure at OneWest Bank shows him to work in his interest and in the corporate interest, at the great expense and harm to everyday Americans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Ms. Gonzalez. I'm going to ask my questions last. Senator Menendez, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you all again. We've been monitoring your statements and got a sense of it. And I just want to elicit a couple things just to make it clear for the record. Ms. Oliver, when you were trying to be a responsible borrower and get a modification, did you think that the attitude of OneWest was one that was trying to help you get to yes, or was it one in which they were constantly giving you the runaround?
Saw this letter, excuse me. Got cold.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And so been working with my lawyer for the last 2 years. I mean, this has been going on. And this has kind of been hanging over my family's head, my kids and myself. And I never saw them ever try to make a deal with me. You know, if you do this, well, I know they talk about modification. They never did that with me. And Now I can't afford a lawyer. It's gone so far. And my kids and I, we look at it like probably the house is going to be foreclosed. And so they're worried naturally about their mother, what's going to happen to me. I've lived in the house for 54 years, and it's going to be really different for me to have to live not in a neighborhood, but in a, and I know a lot of seniors do live in senior apartments. And, but to leave our home, which is the heart and soul of our family, and my husband, that he loved this house. And we kept up our house all the time and paid our taxes. And we got a new furnace, it's got a new roof, it's got new windows from the basement to second floor, we've got new air conditioning. We really have done a lot to keep up the house, because that's our house, you know. And, but then for this organization to come along and ask an 84-year-old widow to give up her house after 54 years is incorrigible. I mean, that doesn't even make sense to do that. He has absolutely no integrity. He doesn't try to feel what other people feels. You know, what is this doing to these other families? And so no, they have never been there for me at all, except one in my house. When we bought the house, it was in 1963. It was $18,000. Now it's $500,000. So I can imagine, yeah, they like my house, and I just have to stop in my tracks and wonder, how can they even think of such a thing? They say that my name wasn't on some of the papers. That's a bunch of bull. I've got showing that Monroe, that Monroe is the owner and I was the co-owner. And, but I guess sometime I didn't sign a certain paper. My husband would roll over in his grave. I mean, as I say, this
So
house.
you don't feel that they were trying to get to a possibility for a loan modification for you? You feel that you only met roadblocks along the way?
About all they did was ask to be the house paid off or foreclosure. And that's as far as, I never was,
Thank you.
you know.
Ms. Oliver, how about your experience? You tried 8 times. Did you feel that they were working with you to get to yes, to let's find a way, or was it basically a runaround?
Initially, me being the trusting person that I am, I thought they were trying to modify my loan, but after getting denial after denial, I soon realized, no, they had no intention of offering me a modification.
Ms. Gonzalez, let me just ask you, since you had a study and looked at this and more broadly, you know, from what I've read of accounts, we'll see tomorrow at his testimony, but Mr. Mnuchin basically says, look, I took over a bad bank, these were bad loans, and at the end of the day, you know, we did the best that we could with it, and so I'm not responsible. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but that's the essence of what he says. I should be almost credited for taking over a bad bank that had a great amount of debt and bad loans. But there's another way of looking at that, isn't there? If you can get someone to be a responsible payer and put them in a position to ultimately both keep their home and pay the proceeds to the bank, that's a desirable goal, both for the individual and for the bank, as having a particular loan that is not in default but being fulfilled. Isn't that a different way to look at it, and your experience with other banks in that regard?
Thank you, Senator. That's a really important question. I think the stories here today illustrate a really important point, which is that We have families that were doing everything they could and were responsible borrowers. They were filling out the proper modification paperwork. They had incomes that were rising. They were sending in the checks on time. They were signing the paperwork. And what they were finding was obstacle after obstacle from the bank, in that they were either not receiving the paperwork, losing the paperwork. And I think the other concern is that we have now evidence from that was recently released from the Attorney General's memo that we saw just a few weeks ago. One of the most concerning pieces of evidence that was shown was that in California, which is a non-judicial state, and it should raise questions about what's happening around the country, you have 90 days. A borrower has 90 days to cure a default or to modify their loan. And what the bank was doing was, before those 90 days were up, they were actually sending notices for a sale of auction. So they weren't even allowing borrowers the full 90 days to cure a default or find a modification. And so what this shows is that, and this was at a time when Mr. Mnuchin was CEO of the bank, is that they weren't actually giving borrowers a fair chance. So I don't necessarily, the question for Mr. Mnuchin.
But they didn't want a responsible borrower, they wanted the property.
That's a question for Mr. Mnuchin, I believe, because borrowers appear to have been doing everything that they could.
And lastly, did I see a report, I think it was you and your organization, that looked at where this bank subsequently established its branches in California, and that those branches overwhelmingly, as well as the mortgage loans that were generated overwhelmingly, are in non-minority communities. Minorities represent a very small, if not almost inconsequential amount of their portfolio, and where their service area is, as someone who, from a Hispanic perspective, has cared about access to capital, I get worried that you take over a bank, we pay for some of the resources in that process. We assume a significant amount of the risk and the cost, and then you end up serving outside of communities, almost specifically so.
Yes, so we filed a complaint with HUD at the end of last year related to redlining. So the bank has their branches, if, I didn't bring a map with me, I can send that information if that's okay, related to where their branches are located. And so if you look at where communities of color are located in their assessment area, basically the branches create what we would call a donut hole that rings around the communities of color in their assessment area, which is of great concern. I think they only have, if I remember correctly, zero branches in majority African American communities. When we looked at their lending in 2014 and 2015 for home mortgage lending, they only made 2 loans to African Americans. And so that seems impossible, but it's true when we looked at their HMDA data. And so this
You say
is
2 on a portfolio of about how big?
I don't remember the numbers right now. They don't, they.
Can you give us just a ballpark?
I think it was, I think they've made hundreds of loans, but I don't remember right now the number exactly. So at this point, I think what we're looking at is a bank that wasn't doing, and they're doing, most of their foreclosures are in communities of color. We have a situation where a bank is doing the way that they're interacting in communities of color is through foreclosures, not through lending, and so it's of grave concern. And so we're hoping that HUD will take this seriously.
Well, thank you. The reason I raised that question, even though we're focused on foreclosure, Senator Warren, is that at the end of the day, it goes to a greater sense of what it is that the bank's focus and mission is on. And their ultimate values versus what we would hope that banks and institutions would be, which is a lender of equal opportunity for all at the end of the day, and a provider of loan modifications when a person can qualify for all at the end of the day. So thank you all again for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Yes, I think this does give us an insight about Mr. Mnuchin's idea of a business model and how to make profits. And we're getting to see multiple parts of that. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Ms. Gonzalez, are you familiar with the Attorney General's national mortgage settlement that was entered into? And California was instrumental in that. So I bring that up because during this period of time, in 2010, the attorney generals across this country entered into a national mortgage settlement with some of the big banks. And the reason why we did so is because many of these banks were engaging in egregious practices. And those egregious practices are what we heard today. It was at a time when homeowners were being, instead of working with homeowners to keep them in their homes or help them, they would put them on a dual track. And it's what I heard today, is they would tell you they're going to work with you if they even told you that. And then there would be another track that would be sending you down that foreclosure path. So on one hand, you think you'd be working with them, and the next, you're getting a foreclosure notice. The other thing that was happening, which again I heard today, was the constantly asking homeowners to resubmit the paperwork. You'd submit it, and then they'd call you and say, oh, you didn't have this information. You need to start all over again. So much so you submitted it over and over and over again. The reason why they did that is because the people that were handling the paperwork were living in a different town or a different division than the people that were working to save and modify your homes quite often. So nobody was communicating with one another, and the banks didn't care. The banks did not care, even after the attorneys general, as we brought it to their attentions that this is happening, you need to address this issue, and we need to work together to help homeowners. Because of that national mortgage settlement, we put in place for the first time a requirement that these banks have to engage in certain practices. We stopped that egregious practice. And the reason why I bring that up is because that national mortgage settlement was one of a kind, because it was not only all the attorneys generals across the country, but it was with the federal government, and it was highlighting the egregious practices of the banks. And what I am hearing, which makes me even more concerned about Mr. Mnuchin, is during this time period when the discussion was the egregious practices of the banks and what they were engaging in not to help homeowners, and he knew it, he was still engaging in that practice. And that is concerning to me, because for my purposes, as somebody who has fought every day for homeowners in my state, I want everybody who is willing to help to be there at the table helping homeowners when there is a crisis. And to this day, many of you are still suffering, and many of you are entitled to some sort of relief that he should be and his bank should be working with you to figure out what that relief is. Now, let me just make this caveat. Not everybody's going to stay in their home because they just can't afford it, because there were times, the practices that these banks engaged in, whether through teaser rates or these Alt-A mortgages, it just made it impossible sometimes for folks to stay in their homes when they were losing their jobs. But we put in place a practice where the banks should help you. If you couldn't stay in your home, if they couldn't modify the loans, if they couldn't work with you, then they work with you on finding other housing or work with you on moving to the next step. And what I'm hearing right now is Mr. Mnuchin and his bank didn't care, didn't do any of that. And even though this was the topic at the time when everybody was losing their homes, they still engaged in egregious practices. And that, to me, is the reason why this gentleman should not be in charge of the Secretary of the Treasury. Because I know as the Attorney General that I engaged so many federal agencies to help homeowners in our state, because that, to me, was the key for fixing and addressing this mortgage crisis. And let me say this. There is a ripple effect still happening, as we heard today, from the mortgage crisis that we had that started back in 2007, 2008. It's not over. And for me, it is about finding people that are going to be willing to help us address these issues. So what I want to ask all of you, if you are willing, whether you contact me or we work with folks within your states and your attorneys general, are any of you aware of the National Mortgage Settlement? Okay. And so there are programs for relief. There are programs that are out there that we should explore together. I understand, Ms. Eisen-Hodruff, that you still are, this is still an issue for you. I think it's something we need to talk to you about and figure out how in your state, in your community, we can look for programs that are going to benefit you. Okay, but I just wanted to make that comment because I don't have any questions, other than I completely understand what is happening to you, because it is something we have been fighting for the last 6-7 years, and it's still going on, and it is still egregious conduct, and it needs to stop. And so I thank you all for being here so much today and telling your story, and look forward to hearing from you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Hirono.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your egregious stories with us. And as I mentioned earlier, we have people in Hawaii who also were dealing with OneWest, and who some of them came to my office to try and to ask us for help. But in 2008, when our country went through really the worst financial crisis in modern times, Hank Paulson was our Treasury Secretary. He came to Congress with a 3-page bill. I know this because I was sitting in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he said, we need to basically bail out the financial industry. And we ultimately did do that, and we passed the Troubled Assets Relief Program. It was a $700 billion program, most of which went to help the financial services industry. Now, if Steve Mnuchin were the Treasury Secretary, what do you think he would have done in 2008? And it's from that time period that you all start to have these, major personal horror stories relating to your mortgage. Do you think he would have come forward and said, let's help the homeowners keep their homes?
Absolutely not. No.
So wouldn't you have a concern?
I don't think that it would have been any concern for him.
Based on his track record, and of course, based on the practices of a company that he had leadership over.
We are all just average people. We're not 1%ers. We're not big names. So to Mr. Mnuchin, I feel that we don't matter.
I would have you, as our senators representing us, ask him a question, that same question. If we had a financial crisis in that time, 2007 beginning, 2007, if we have another financial crisis, will he act the same way that he acted during this financial crisis? How will he handle, how he handled us with OneWest Bank, how would he handle the government of the United States?
I think that's a pretty good hypothetical question to ask him because, one, it may be hypothetical to him, but it actually confronted our country in 2008 and led to the kind of situation where many families, individuals like yourselves, have not recovered from. So, Ms. Gonzalez, I note in your testimony that the California Attorney General's office did a review of some sort, and they said that OneWest had engaged in, I forget what the terms, practices, certain kinds of practices. Did they ever go after OneWest in California?
They did not. And I can't speak for the Attorney General's office as to why they made that decision.
The words were widespread misconduct. It could be that there were not adequate state laws that were on point to enable them to go after entities like OneWest, although Catherine Cortez Masto did indicate that there were some states' attorney generals that did provide leadership and came up with the settlement, the national mortgage settlement that none of you had heard of. So clearly some states' attorney generals did step forward to try and create a program that is still in existence. So as she had mentioned, perhaps this is an entity that this settlement can still help you all. For
Ms. Colleen Hodroff. Now, you were the victim of basically a reverse mortgage program, and it sounded really great, right? You could keep your
yeah.
home, and your testimony said that you were told that your husband didn't have to be on these reverse mortgage documents. Was that ever in writing?
That he didn't have to be on
That he
it?
didn't, that you didn't have to be on the reverse
I've
mortgage?
never heard that, because he was always on it.
No, he was, but you weren't.
But myself, but I've seen, yeah, where I'm on it. I'm a co-borrower.
I'm sorry, I thought that the reason that they were able to come in after your husband's death was that you were not on the reverse mortgage document.
That's what they're saying, and that's why they want to do a foreclosure.
So
is-
you're either on the mortgage document or you're not, on the reverse mortgage document,
When we
because,
first took out the
little
reverse
confused.
mortgage, we both had to sign a lot of papers. And so at that time, and that was in 2006. So I don't know what happened that they're thinking, they must want my house awful bad.
yeah, one would think that if both of you were on the reverse mortgage document, that they could not come in as long as you were alive, because I thought that was the point of a reverse mortgage, that you can stay in your home,
Yes.
as long as, so there seems to be some definite confusion there.
Right.
So I know that there are agencies or entities that particularly target seniors for these reverse mortgage programs. Does that raise concerns for you, Ms. Gonzalez?
Yes, I mean, these reverse mortgages can be very confusing, and financial freedom has been, I think, extremely, one of the most dangerous, I think. The New York Attorney General's office, actually today in the Wall Street Journal, it was reported that they're being investigated by their office. I think for these exact reasons that we're hearing about today. They're borrowers that are very confused about the situation they're in, servicing issues such as we're hearing from borrowers being told that they're being foreclosed upon because they don't live in the home, but yet they're being served with foreclosure documents while they're in the home. So I think financial freedom, again, there's issues about why these aggressive foreclosure practices, both at OneWest and financial freedom, and questions for Mr. Mnuchin that started when he was at OneWest about the kinds of practices that he put in place and kind of this foreclosure machine that sought profits over people.
Well, one of the outcomes of the financial crisis of 2008 was not only the TARP, the $700 billion of the Troubled Assets Relief Program that I mentioned, that really, better known as the bank bailout bill, but also led to the passage of Dodd-Frank, which contains the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that our colleague was a major proponent of, and in fact, it was her idea. So we now have in Steve Mnuchin, someone who says he would roll back Dodd-Frank. I don't think he's a fan of Dodd-Frank. Would you be concerned that one of the items that would be, provisions that would be rolled back is this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that is there to help people who are being taken advantage of by the financial industry? Would you be concerned that that bureau would be eliminated under a Mnuchin
I think
leadership?
we would be very concerned about Mr. Mnuchin advocating for the dismantling of Dodd-Frank and the protections it put in place under the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, especially for families who can be hurt by deceptive and abusive and predatory practices like those at mortgage companies like OneWest and Financial Freedom. There's protections there now at the CFPB. There's a complaint process and enforcement actions that the CFPB can use. And we'd be very concerned that Mr. Mnuchin can use his position of power and his interests and Wall Street over everyday Americans to dismantle the CFPB.
So one last question for the other witnesses. Have any of you contacted the CFPB and told them of your experiences? Yes, I have. And the rest of you have not?
No, I have not, because this happened to me so long ago that he's trying to move
Well,
on.
considering these kinds of practices still continue, maybe it might be a good thing. Yes.
I have not. This was put away for a lot of years until I heard the nomination for him and brought it all out, and that's why I'm
Yes.
here today. I would have, I don't know what's going on in this. I'm learning now every day as we go along this and being here, but yeah, this was all bad memory.
Thank you. I'm sure that there's a part of you that wants to put it behind
it's
you.
our bad story. Who's it going to be in 4 more years?
But to know that it's still happening and it could happen, continue to happen. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Hirono. I agree. We'd like to think this is all over. And the terrible things that happened to 2 of you, I understand you put them away. You talked about your papers. You didn't even think you had them anymore and had to dig them out. That's why.
Honestly, the saddest thing here,
Please.
is being with this woman.
I know.
I'm so emotional over this because, we've had our hardship. My family dealt with this hardship, but to allow an 84-year-old woman that's lived in her house for 56 years to be foreclosed on over for money is that is not the American way.
So let's talk about this just a little bit. Let's frame this up. We've got 3 different areas that we've been talking about today. One of them is reverse mortgages. Going out and marketing to seniors, sometimes in their 70s, in their 80s, in their 90s, and putting mortgages on homes that people already own. And they're set up in a way, obviously, that in some cases, it ends up costing the senior their home. That's one package of problems that OneWest has moved forward. One is the foreclosure problem. That is, when they had this big portfolio during the crash, a lot of people who were in financial trouble, and the way they danced and double dealt. And what is this? Had some kind of magic trick where the check arrived on time for them to be able to cash it, but none of the other paperwork arrived on time? And a magic trick that was so good it happened twice? Pretty amazing stuff. And then the third point about redlining. Now, so one way that they have the portfolio they want going forward is they make sure that they set up all of their operations in neighborhoods where they will not have African American or Latino borrowers. And they think that's how they have the package they want to have going forward. So we've seen 3 different approaches here to the profit model for OneWest, and how Mr. Mnuchin set it up to make money, and not just a little bit of money, a whole lot of money by setting up the profit models that work for the bank and work for himself personally. So let me just take one of those, and then we'll stop and let someone else do some questions. But I just want to come back, if I can, Ms. Eisenhodriff, and ask you a little bit about the reverse mortgages. And let me just say why this is so important. We're talking about, you said you went to Financial Freedom, which sounded great, right?
Yes.
Financial Freedom, it's a subsidiary of OneWest that Mr. Mnuchin ran. Now, that bank has 17% of all reverse mortgages in the country. Now, that is a really huge portfolio of this very specialized kind of loan that targets seniors. They are responsible for nearly 40% of all the foreclosures on those loans.
Yeah.
That is, of all the people in the country who are losing their homes, 40% of them are in Mr. Mnuchin's plan here.
Yes.
So if I can, I just want to see if I can put this back together. You said, what was it that you and Monroe did for a living?
Well, we would hear about, advertisements on TV.
No, what did you say you did for a living?
Oh, my husband, we own convenience stores, four of them.
So you ran 4 stores, and you were married, how long when he passed?
56 years.
I'm sorry?
56.
So you were married 56 years, and you had lived in the home how long at that point?
54.
54 years. So then you got a reverse mortgage from Financial Freedom, and when you got this mortgage, did you have an outstanding mortgage? Did you owe any money on the house, or was the house
yeah.
paid off?
No.
The house was paid off.
So when you take a reverse mortgage, we got money through our equity.
Right, but the house was paid off.
And I guess not by us, but it must have been paid off by Financial Freedom?
Oh, well, no, I don't think so. I think you owned this house outright.
Uh-huh.
When you did the mortgage, did you own your house completely?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good.
Oh,
good.
yeah.
Okay. And you have said that Financial Freedom said that you and your husband, whichever was the survivor, would be able to stay there till you die. So both of you plan to live in this house for the rest of your days.
You're right.
How soon after Monroe's funeral did Financial Freedom tell you they were going to take the house?
Oh, I got a letter in the mail, and it was with a short time. I would say maybe 2 weeks, maybe. And I got this letter, and it said either to pay off the mortgage or pay for the house, or they're going to foreclose.
So about 2 weeks after Monroe was buried,
Yeah.
you end up getting this letter from the company telling you you're going to have to, basically, you're going to have to move out of the house.
right.
Now, when you told the company that you had been promised exactly that would not happen, that either you or Monroe, as for all of your days, would be able to stay in this house.
Yes.
What did Financial Freedom say to you?
And nothing to me. Actually, they didn't really talk to much. I got a lawyer right away, and they would communicate back and forth. But they were really determined to have my house because they said that I wasn't on the reverse mortgage.
Right. And so you said now you can no longer afford the lawyer?
Right.
So Financial Freedom gets in touch directly with you?
I would love to appeal, but I can't afford to do that.
I
so-
understand that costs money, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To be able to do that. So they keep sending you foreclosure notices.
Well, I haven't gotten any for the last, maybe 3 months.
So what do you think
But
happens?
I did get $2,000 check because we weren't going to appeal. And so they sent, I don't know if the check was for moving or what, but yeah, I got a $2,000 check.
So they sent you a $2,000 check in the hopes that you're going to move out of your home, which you said is worth about how much?
And $500,000.
About $500,000, and that you will just go away.
Right.
That's what they're counting on here.
Yeah, they can have the money back.
And so
This
where
is a
would,
story I learned yesterday, and it's just taken me back. She could go home and not have a home. She could go home and have a foreclosure with the blue tape like I did. She's
that's
84
awful.
years old.
To have my neighbors see foreclosure?
That, but to be homeless.
Yeah.
It's devastating me personally.
Yeah.
I have my own situation. Everybody has
Yeah,
this,
everybody
but
has
to
it,
take
and they
advantage
all
of
sound
this.
terrible.
This is America right here.
yeah. And so as far as you know, as Ms. McCurry said, they can just show up and take your house now?
I'm sorry.
They can just show up and take your house now?
And is that, I don't know how they go about it. I haven't heard anything more about foreclosure since I got that check.
All right.
And since I got that
This is
letter.
the way they work. With me, with the modification, they would say, reapply, reapply. I reapplied. showed up and I had the foreclosure on my window with the blue tape. I was out after they told me the last time to reapply. I responded with numerous letters. Nobody ever got back to me. Within 3 months, I was out of my house.
So I have to ask, Ms. Gonzalez, are these stories just one-off? Did we find the aberration? Or is this part of the business practice of Financial Freedom and OneWest, the bank that Mr. Mnuchin set up their business practices and figured out how to make $200 million off it?
I wish I could say that these were just a few stories. You know, we've been getting phone calls in our office, and we've been hearing them over and over again, and it's still hard to sit here and listen to them. Because these are families that we're talking about, that from one day, this is the American dream that everybody wishes that they could have and pass on their homes to their children. This is where people raise their families, and they're not alone in this experience, that they can lose their home. And so, unfortunately, it's happening 60,000 times as far as we've been able to count. We've been trying to get numbers from different states across the country. These come from numbers that we've been able to count in 5 western states, including Arizona, Nevada, California, Oregon, and Washington. We haven't been able to get numbers from Hawaii, from Florida, and we'd love to be able to try to get the numbers from some other states, and these include numbers from reverse mortgages. And so that's 60,000 foreclosures that we've been able to count, and we know that there's more out there.
Thank you. I'm going to yield to Senator Murray if she would like to make a statement or ask some questions.
I would just, first of all, let me thank Senator Warren for convening this. This is so important for all of us to hear, and I really want to thank all of you who've traveled here today. I know it wasn't easy for any of you to really have us understand it and know your impact, and thank you for telling us. You think there's about 60,000 stories like this, because these are not unique, and we've all heard them, and you represent a lot of people, so thank you so much for your courage. It's so important for us to hear from you so we understand this nominee's character and his business practices before we vote on him to confirm him. And clearly, the position he's been nominated for has a direct impact on every household in America, so no one should be thinking, this won't touch me. So I can't understate how critically important this is. As these witnesses have all made clear, this nominee's treatment to homeowners during his time leading OneWest Bank does very little to inspire any confidence that he will be willing to help working families, something President-elect Trump, by the way, campaigned on. When millions of Americans face losing their homes, their retirement savings, economic security during the Great Recession, this nominee chose to kick people out of their homes. And why? To make a quick buck, obviously. For he and his efforts, he and his partners profited quite handsomely. My understanding is they took home $3.4 billion between them. So on issue after issue, I think this nominee leaves no doubt that he is going to do what is best for big business, millionaires like him, at the expense of working families. In fact, he has called the implementation of Donald Trump's tax plan, which is a massive tax cut for the wealthiest Americans, his top priority. He's indicated a willingness to strip away critical economic protections for consumers by rolling back elements of Dodd-Frank, and he's called for restoring Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to private ownership. That is a move which will not only enrich billionaire hedge funders, but could jeopardize the availability of a 30-year fixed mortgage, which is a crucial option for a lot of our middle-class families and first-time homeowners. So to me, this nomination is not about draining the swamp. It is about draining it and filling it with his own swamp creatures. So I really appreciate all of you showing up today to help us understand this. And Senator Warren, I want to thank you again for allowing people to be a part of this critical process as we consider these nominees.
Thank you. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Thank you for having this hearing, and thank all of you for being here to testify to the human toll of Mr. Mnuchin's business practices. I represent the state of Maryland, and not far from where we're sitting here in Prince George's County, Maryland, we were particularly hard hit by the foreclosure crisis, and the impact is still continuing on families in Prince George's County, predominantly African-American area. In fact, before Senator Warren became a senator and she was looking into the financial crisis and the impact, she came and held a hearing with Congressman Elijah Cummings and many of us in Prince George's County. Thank you, Senator, for that. And that led ultimately to many reforms, including the establishment of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which is something we need to make sure we retain. But as a member of Congress who was representing an area, we heard a lot of stories and had to intervene regularly with banks that were foreclosing on people. And the sad part about this story is that it shouldn't require the intervention of a member of Congress in order to stop these bad things from happening. Ms. Oliver, I understand that you got a reprieve of about 30 days thanks to Senator Menendez's intervention here, and we will continue to intervene in individual cases wherever possible, but this is a systemic problem, and we can't just have a system where calling a member of Congress's office is what's necessary to get people to do the right thing. Ms. Gonzalez, we've seen a lot of the banks doing this kind of thing, but in your experience and based on what you've seen with respect to Mr. Mnuchin's business practices, is this different in kind and degree than the others that you have seen? Is this somebody who really had a model where they were just going ching, ching, ching with the cash machine through foreclosure? How would you rate the wrongdoing or sort of malfeasance of this business compared to the others that you've seen?
This bank, I think, had a particular interest in foreclosures. OneWest, both because of the stories we hear, but the data that we've collected. The HAMP program was set up to assist homeowners in loan modifications. Their denial rate was 73%. There were only 3 banks that were worse, or servicers that had worse denial rates. So they were at the very bottom from the data that we looked at the end of last year. OneWest had a model and has a model both in their traditional mortgage and in their reverse mortgage business of profiting off foreclosures and on denying modifications, as well as, it appears, losing paperwork, dual tracking borrowers, and profiting off foreclosures. And now Mr. Mnuchin, given that he was particularly bad at assisting everyday Americans at the bank, could take this model to the Treasury, and that should be of particular concern.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that the president-elect picked somebody who, even in a spectrum of bad actors, was among the very worst in the country. Just one other question. Ms. McCreary, you mentioned about the sort of terrible, impact of foreclosing on senior citizens. It also has an impact, of course, on all families, but I wanted to ask you a question about families with children. I understand you have some children and some of the others here. Can you talk to the impact on your child's life of being under a constant threat and then actual foreclosure?
I'm not. We're done with our foreclosure. We foreclosed. She's having the situation right now.
Okay. And just speak to the impact during the time. But if you could start, Ms. Oliver, that'd be great.
Yes. I have 3 children. My oldest one is the only one that I've shared it with. My husband and I kept it to ourselves. Just recently, we shared it with her My two youngest ones, they have no idea what's going on. My youngest daughter at Christmas Day said to me, "I love this house." And my heart almost broke because I don't have the heart to tell her that we're losing our house. So it has had a huge impact on my family and me personally, because that's a home where everybody gathers for Christmas, birthdays, funerals. Recently, my brother passed away. Everybody was there from far and near. So it's more than a house. It's our home. And it will have a huge impact on my family.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. I just want to see if we can wrap this up with just a couple more questions. I know this has been hard, and I do appreciate the time you've spent here. Ms. Gonzalez, Senator Van Hollen, I was already asking you, there's nothing aberrational here. This is a bad actor bank. This is not the standard. This is not the routine, kind of somewhere right in the middle, that President-elect Trump has found for his Treasury nominee someone who designed one of the worst banks in the industry that has routinely preyed on people in trouble on their mortgages, preyed on seniors through reverse mortgages, and engaged in redlining practices. Is that, as an expert, how you see this?
Yes, I think given the predatory practices with the reverse mortgages, the continued stories we hear related to the reverse mortgages, the modification practices and the denial rates that we're seeing, and that's data collected by the Treasury Department that Mr. Mnuchin seeks to run, and the redlining issues that are also data-driven by HMDA data. It's all painting a picture of a bank that has done a whole lot of damage and very little good. If you look at the reinvestment activity by the bank under the Community Reinvestment Act, they also, given the data that we've collected, and if we compare them to other banks in California, they also rank at the very bottom.
And one of the consequences, when you say rank at the very bottom, let me just ask this question the other direction. It may be obvious, but I just want to make sure everybody sinks in on this point. Is it possible to make money in the banking industry without cheating people and tricking them?
It appears that other banks have been able to do that. I mean, we work with, the California Reinvestment Coalition works with other banks that have been able to do things the right way. And so, yes.
This wasn't their last chance to make a profit, to be between profit and loss. This was a chance to drive up profits so they could turn around and sell this bank for an extraordinary amount of money. I think it's reported that he may have made $200 million for having run this bank for a little over half dozen years and set all of these procedures up.
Greed in the finest example at our expense.
So let me ask about this. There's just one more part I just would like you to be able to tell people about. What is it like when you're living under the threat of foreclosure? When it's coming in, Ms. Oliver, you can start.
It's a horrible feeling because I'm still in that process, not knowing if I'm gonna have my house, not being able to tell my kids, coming home, paper just taped all over your house, getting a call from neighbors, there's paper all over your house, there's foreclosure papers, that is. Just not knowing. It's a horrible feeling, and then submitting modification after modification, trusting that the bank is doing the right thing and really trying to help you modify your loan, stay in your house, and then only to find out that is truly not the case.
So some days it feels like maybe you're almost there.
Right, it's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
It really is. Some days I'm depressed, and other days I have hope, So it's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
It's been a roller coaster for the past 7 years.
And Ms. Clifford, you've been trying to run a business during the whole time that you were dealing with OneWest and the foreclosures. Can you just say a word about what it's like to go through this process where, you know, in one ear they're telling you, yes, just do this, and we're going to modify your loan, and on the other side they're saying, we're going to take it away?
It's terrifying. Just like Miss Oliver said, you know, you think that, okay, I'm finally making progress, you know, things are going to be resolved, I'm doing what I need to do as a diligent homeowner, and then only to find out 2 weeks later, oh no, all of that work that I just did in order to secure this loan modification is basically null and void due to what I think Senator Cortez Masto was saying, people were in different locations without communication.
And you know that was deliberate, by the way.
Absolutely.
I mean, this was not like just a mistake that they couldn't find enough housing, or enough office space in the
Senator
same
Warren,
place.
I have stacks of fax covers to different IndyMac employee names and various phone numbers, by the way, with the documents that they requested. It was absolutely terrifying. I actually ended up closing my business in the Los Angeles area and relocated down to San Diego. I currently have been able to reopen my business, but between trying to juggle that and, you know, finding a place to live in 5 days and pack up 10 years of your life with this, you know, impending credit doom lingering over you, it was a nightmare. Yeah. And, you know, I've been good all day, and this is the kind of the fourth time today I've told this story, and it just finally is like, you know, it's still there.
Yeah. Yeah. Ms. McCreary, do you want to add to that?
Living under foreclosure was, in 25 years of being married, by far the hardest situation we've ever gone through as a family, as a couple. He asked about family and the kids, and we really kept it from our kids. It was our priority to keep our finances and our business away from our kids so it wouldn't affect us. Kids have got enough to deal with. This was an adult problem. But living under foreclosure, sitting next to these ladies right now, what they're going through right now is the worst days. And so I feel so bad for both of them. I really do, because you did not sleep, you did not eat, you did not make any future plans for your life. You were in limbo, thinking you're gonna go this way, and everything's gonna be back on track, and then everything gets taken, and it gets taken, and then it's done and over and buried. And living under foreclosure and in the process was the most shameful thing, embarrassing, shameful.
I think Senator Hirona wants to add something.
Ms. Gonzalez, I just wanted to get a clarification on the 60,000 foreclosure numbers that you cited. And that's just data from, did you say 5 states?
We purchased that data from Property Radar for 5 states, and added in the reverse mortgage numbers.
Was OneWest active nationally?
Yes.
So basically, you only have data from 45 of the 50 states.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, and then the reverse mortgages include, that we got that number from HUD. So that number is a national number. But we would love to get the number for the other 45 states.
So the 60,000 number includes how many reverse mortgage foreclosures?
That includes 16,000 reverse
Thank you.
mortgages.
One more question. President-elect Trump wants to make America great again. Do you think that this can happen with nominees such as Ben Carson for HUD, who has no experience with that agency, or Betsy DeVos of the Department of Education Secretary, who doesn't support public education, or Steve Mnuchin for Treasury?
It's baffling who he has appointed. It is purely baffling. How are you going to make America great with people that have no experience and doing anything for anybody other than themselves?
Because it makes him look great. To put in these incompetent people makes him look better as a person and as a president. So you put in a bunch of losers and you look pretty good. That's exactly what a bully does. They surround themselves by losers, so they're the top bully.
Tell us what you really think.
Thank you.
You're the perfect example of that.
So I promise, I have just one last question I just want you to think about for a second. This is it. We brought you here because what we had hoped was that we would be able to have you testify at his confirmation hearing, that there would be a second panel, and it would be a panel made up of people who had experienced what it was like to be a customer of Mr. Mnuchin's. We were turned down. The chair of the committee, Senator Shelby, said no, we would not do that. So now what we're doing instead is this is just your chance. We wanted you to come here to be able to tell the 100 senators who are going to vote on the confirmation of Steve Mnuchin to be Secretary of Treasury. And if we could, I'd just like to finish this by asking each of you just to tell us your view about confirming Steve Mnuchin as Secretary of Treasury, and I'll let you go in any order. And Ms. Oliver, you're ready to go.
Well, if Steve Mnuchin becomes Secretary of Treasury, if he runs our country the way he ran OneWest Bank, cutthroat, incentive activity, this country is in trouble.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver. Anyone else? Ms. Clifford?
Yes. Appointing him as Secretary of Treasury could be devastating for this country. It might be great for a few small percent, but for the rest of us, it's going to send us into a tailspin, one of which we may not recover. And that is something serious to think about before voting yes for Steve Mnuchin as Secretary of Treasury.
Thank you, Ms. Clifford. Ms. Eisenhodroff?
I guess I have to go back to Mr. Trump. He's not my president. I'm with Lewis. But I still wish him well. I hope that he becomes a great president and really fools us all. But I don't see that coming. And the men that he has picked for all of these different jobs, I don't see one that I could really vote for or go for. I mean, they've all got such serious faults, or they're just stupid and they don't even know what's going on, you know, to be able to be like Tillerson. And they're so connected to, a lot of them, to Putin. And to wind up that could affect things, that since Trump and Tillerson are close to Putin. So there's so many different things. And Mnuchin is all a part of that. It's like a mafia. And, yeah, they're kind of working together, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Ms. McCreary, I'll let you have the final word on this.
Thank you.
If Stephen, oh my gosh, this word is a word I couldn't say, and obviously after today I'm learning it really well, Mnuchin, was appointed Secretary of Treasury. I think you're going to be seeing rooms full of people in the next 4 years that are going to be disgruntled Americans, that are going to be stepped on and stomped on and mistreated, and your job's going to be so much more hard than it already is. And speaking of your job specifically, you, Senator Warren, I appreciate everything that you do for us.
Yeah.
You really represent the
you.
voice of America.
Boy, he's a real friend.
So thank you for being here. I know how hard this is when you're in the middle of an unfolding crisis,
Yes.
as two of you are, when two of you have had to go back and dig up some really unpleasant times, some really hard memories.
yes.
But I appreciate your doing this because you speak out, each of you, for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of other people who didn't
what
get the
it's all
chance to
about.
come here to talk to us. I'm grateful to you for doing this, and I'm grateful to you for being a reminder that the Secretary of Treasury will personally touch the lives of every single person in the United States.
So,
And we have now had a chance to hear from 4 people whose lives he already had a chance to touch, and the results were devastating. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today.
thank you
This is closed.
very much.